In 4 months, I was going to own the building he was firing me in. Dale Thompson didn't know that. He just knew he had a termination letter in his hand, and 12 coworkers watching him hold it. He slid it across the table like it was nothing. Like I was nothing. "This isn't personal, Rachel," he said. He had no idea how personal it was about to get. 12 people sat around that table, laptops open, coffee cups sweating rings into the wood, and every single one of them was looking at me instead of their screens. "Performance issues," Dale said. "HR has the documentation." I looked at that folder. 6 months of write-ups he'd built one email at a time, each one timed right after I'd asked about the Henderson account numbers, the ones that didn't add up. "Do you have anything to say?" Dale asked, already checking his watch. I had plenty to say. I just wasn't ready to say it yet. 3 months earlier, none of this had even started. The Monday morning meeting started the same way it always did, with Dale standing at the front of the room next to the shared calendar on the screen, and me sitting 3 seats down with my laptop open to the quarterly numbers I had stayed until 8 the night before to finish. He pulled up my report on the projector before I even had a chance to walk him through it myself. "Rachel put this together," he said, tapping the screen with his knuckle. "Take a look at the formatting on slide 4. This is the kind of thing that makes us look unprofessional in front of clients." Nobody laughed, but a few people shifted in their chairs, the way people do when they want to look busy instead of watching. "I could fix that in 5 minutes, I said. "I just wanted feedback on the projections first, since those numbers are what Henderson is going to ask about." Dale didn't answer that. He moved on to the next slide, then circled back a minute later just to say it again, slower this time, like maybe I hadn't understood him. "We hold a certain standard here, Rachel. I need you to meet it." I nodded and wrote something down in my notebook that had nothing to do with the meeting, just so my hands had something to do besides sitting still in my lap. I had $1,100 in my checking account and a rent payment due on the 1st. My health insurance through the company was the only thing standing between me and a specialist bill I hadn't told anyone about. Walking out of that room and telling Dale exactly what I thought of him was not a luxury I had. So I sat there, quiet, professional, taking notes on formatting changes for a report Henderson had already told me looked fine. What nobody in that room knew, including Dale, was that I had spent the previous Saturday on a phone call that had nothing to do with slide formatting at all, a call I had taken from my car in a parking lot 3 blocks from the office, just to be sure no one walked past and heard a single word of it. The senior leadership review happened 2 weeks later, in the glass conference room on the top floor, the one people only got invited into a few times a year. I had put in for the operations manager promotion back in March. 3 years at the company, every performance review above expectations, and a stack of client emails praising the Henderson turnaround specifically. Jenna had helped me rehearse for it the week before, sitting across from me at her desk with a legal pad, firing off questions the panel might ask. "You've got this," she told me. "Nobody's worked harder on that account than you have." I believed her. That was my mistake, thinking it meant something. Dale sat at the head of the table during the review, flipping through my file like he was reading it for the first time, even though he had signed off on every one of those performance reviews himself. "I want to be honest with the panel," he said, not looking at me. "Rachel's technically capable, but I have concerns about her readiness for a leadership role. There have been consistency issues. I don't think this is the right time." One of the senior VPs turned to Jenna, since she worked closest with me day to day. "Would you agree with that assessment?" Jenna looked down at her folder for a second too long. "I think Dale would know better than I would," she said. "He manages her directly." That was it. Not a defense. Not even a neutral answer. Just enough distance to make sure none of it landed on her. The promotion went to a guy from the Denver office who had been with the company for 8 months. I sat in the parking garage afterward for 20 minutes before I could make myself start the car, not because I was falling apart, but because I needed a few minutes where nobody could watch my face and report back on what they saw there. This wasn't about a raise anymore. A raise I could survive without. This was Dale deciding out loud, in a room full of people who mattered, that I wasn't someone worth taking seriously, and Jenna deciding it was safer to let him say it. I thought about the folder sitting in my bag, the one with the notary stamp on it, the one nobody at that table knew existed yet. 3 more signatures, I thought. That's all I need. 3 more signatures and none of this is going to matter the way they think it does. A courier envelope showed up at my desk on a Thursday afternoon, plain and unmarked except for a return address printed in small type, a law office 2 states away that had nothing to do with anything the company worked with. I slid it into my bag before I had even finished reading the sender line, fast enough that I knocked my coffee cup half an inch across the desk. Jenna glanced over from her monitor. Everything okay? You look like you just got a jury summons. Just some paperwork from my accountant, I said, already pulling up my email like I had somewhere else to be. Tax stuff. Boring. She let it go, the way people do when they've got their own deadlines pressing on them. I heard her tell someone later that week, in passing, that I had gotten weirdly cagey about a piece of mail, but she said it the way you mention something you already forgot, not the way you say something you think matters. Later that afternoon my phone rang from a number I had saved under a name that meant nothing to anyone else in that office. I stepped into the stairwell to take it, the one hardly anyone used because it echoed too much and the badge reader on that door stuck half the time. Yes, I said, keeping my voice low and even. Proceed with the transfer as discussed. I want everything filed before the 15th. I hung up and stood there a moment, my back against the cold concrete wall, listening to make sure nobody had followed me in. 3 signatures left. Then all of it would be real, whether anyone upstairs was ready for that or not. The Monday morning that everything came apart started like any other, badge scan at the door, coffee from the break room, my laptop open before 9. I had no idea how close I already was to the one meeting that would change everything. Dale called an all hands at 10, no agenda posted on the shared calendar, which never happened. People filed into the open floor area by the windows, coffee mugs in hand, some of them still logging off Slack messages on their phones as they walked over. I want to talk about accountability, Dale said, standing in front of the room with his arms crossed. This team has had a rough quarter, and rough quarters happen because certain people aren't pulling their weight. He didn't say my name. He didn't have to. His eyes found mine and stayed there just long enough that half the room followed his gaze without meaning to. Rachel, he said, finally, since we're all here, why don't you walk everyone through the Henderson numbers again? Maybe this time it'll make more sense. The Henderson numbers were fine. They had been fine for weeks. I opened my mouth to say so, and he cut in before I finished the first sentence. Actually, don't bother, he said. I think we all know what we're going to see. A few people laughed, the nervous kind, the kind that comes out when nobody's sure if it's safe to stay quiet or worse to laugh along. Jenna stared at her shoes. Nobody looked at me directly, the way people avoid looking at a car accident and still can't stop themselves from noticing it. HR will be reaching out about next steps, Dale said, already turning back to his laptop like the meeting was over. I think we all know this has been coming for a while. I stood there in front of 12 coworkers, in the same open floor office where I had worked every day for 3 years, and understood exactly what he had just done, in front of everyone, without saying a single word he could be held accountable for later. I walked back to my desk, sat down, and opened my email like nothing had happened, because I had exactly one phone call left to make before any of this stopped being something Dale controlled. I left the office at noon, telling Jenna I had a doctor's appointment, which wasn't technically a lie since the building I was driving to did have a doctor's office on the 2nd floor. Mine was the 4th floor, Suite 410, a law office with my attorney's name stenciled on frosted glass. Marcus Webb had been handling this for me since March, back when it was still just an idea I said out loud once in his office and half expected him to talk me out of. Rachel, he said, standing up from his desk as I walked in, we're ready. The escrow closed this morning. I need your signature on 3 documents and then it's done. I sat down across from him, my hands steadier than I expected them to be, given that Dale had spent that same morning humiliating me in front of 12 people for a report that had never actually been wrong. "Walk me through it one more time," I said. "I want to hear it in plain English before I sign anything." Marcus slid the first document across the table. Harrington Group's parent holding company had been quietly restructuring its ownership for the better part of a year, after the founder decided to step back and sell his controlling shares through a private placement instead of taking the company public. I had spent every dollar of the Simon property settlement, a piece of family land that had sat worthless for a decade before an interchange project turned it into something else entirely, buying into that placement in small increments, through a trust that kept my name off anything Dale or anyone else at the company could have searched. "As of this morning," Marcus said, tapping the second page, "you hold 52% of the parent company. Which means you don't just work at Harrington Group anymore, Rachel. You control it." I signed my name 3 times, each signature steadier than the last, while a small part of me sat back and watched myself do it like I was watching someone else entirely. Dale still thought he was firing an employee. He had no idea he was about to report to one. I asked Marcus one more question before I left his office that afternoon. "When does the board meeting happen, the one where new ownership gets formally introduced to leadership?" He checked his calendar. "Thursday morning. 9 o'clock. Dale Thompson's name is already on the invite list, sent out an hour ago by the corporate office. He has no idea who's walking into that room." I went back to the office that same afternoon, badge scan, elevator, the same desk I had sat at for 3 years, because Marcus had told me the smartest thing I could do before Thursday was absolutely nothing different. "Don't quit," he said. "Don't confront him. Don't even let your face change when he talks to you. Let the board meeting do the work." So I answered emails. I finished the Henderson deck, the real version, the one with the numbers that had never actually been wrong. I even sat through another 10 minutes of Dale explaining, unprompted, how HR would be finalizing my separation paperwork by end of week, standard stuff, direct deposit of the final check, COBRA information for continuing my health insurance if I wanted it. "You're taking this well," he said, almost sounding disappointed by it. "No point making it harder than it needs to be," I said, and meant every word, just not in the way he thought I meant it. Wednesday night I sat at my kitchen table with the board meeting invite pulled up on my laptop, 9 a.m. Thursday, conference room B, mandatory attendance for department leads. Dale's name sat right there on the list, same as always, same confidence, same assumption that Thursday was going to look like every other Thursday he had ever walked into. I read through the shareholder documents one more time before bed, not because I needed to, Marcus had already triple-checked everything, but because some part of me still needed to see my own name printed there in black and white before I could believe it belonged to me. Rachel Bennett, 52%, majority holder. I closed the laptop and went to sleep earlier than I had in months, because for the first time in a long time, I wasn't dreading what the morning was going to bring. Conference room B looked exactly the same as it always did, the same long table, the same water pitcher sweating in the middle of it, the same view of the parking garage through the window. I got there first, at Marcus's suggestion, and sat down at the head of the table instead of my usual seat 3 chairs from the end. Department leads filed in around 8:50, coffee cups in hand, some of them glancing at me sitting where I was sitting and saying nothing, the way people don't ask questions when they assume there's a reasonable explanation they just haven't heard yet. Dale walked in at 8:58, 2 minutes early, the way he always was for anything involving corporate leadership, straightening his tie as he came through the door. "Morning, everyone," he said, scanning the room for a seat near the front. "Anybody know what this is about?" I heard something about a corporate update. "Ownership transition," someone said. That's all the invite said. Dale nodded, clearly unbothered, and started to sit down in the chair closest to the head of the table, the one right next to me, before he actually looked at who was sitting there. I watched it happen in pieces. First his eyes moved to my face, confused, like his brain hadn't caught up yet. Then down to the folder in front of me, the corporate letterhead visible at the top of the page, Harrington Group Holdings, majority shareholder disclosure. Then to my name printed under the shareholder signature line. Rachel Bennett. He didn't sit down. He stood there with one hand still on the back of the chair, and I watched every assumption he had ever made about me leave his face at the same time, one after another, like a row of lights going out down a hallway. Marcus stood up from his seat near the window and addressed the room before Dale had a chance to say a single word. For those who haven't been briefed yet, he said, as of this week, Ms. Bennett holds 52% ownership of Harrington Group's parent holding company. She'll be joining today's meeting as majority shareholder, effective immediately. The room went quiet in a way I had never heard it go quiet before, not even during layoffs. Somebody's coffee cup clicked softly against the table. Dale still hadn't sat down. He was still standing there, staring at the paperwork in front of me, at my name printed in black ink at the bottom of a page that had absolutely nothing to do with formatting, or performance reviews, or anything he had ever put in a folder about me. Rachel, he said finally, his voice smaller than I had ever heard it. I think there might be some kind of mistake here. There's no mistake, Dale, I said. Please, sit down. We have a lot to talk about. Dale sat down slowly, like his legs had made the decision without checking with the rest of him first. Rachel, he started, I want you to know that whatever happened between us professionally, that was never personal. I was just trying to hold the team to a standard. I let that sit in the air for a second before I answered. You blocked my promotion in front of senior leadership and told a room full of people I wasn't ready for it, I said. Then you fired me in front of the entire floor for a report that was never wrong to begin with. I'm not here to relitigate that, Dale. I'm here because the board asked me to be. He opened his mouth again, then closed it, because there wasn't really a version of that sentence that ended anywhere good. Marcus slid a folder across the table toward him. Effective today, your role is being reviewed by the board's compensation committee, he said. HR will reach out this afternoon regarding next steps. You'll remain on payroll during the review period, per company policy. Dale nodded, staring at the table, saying nothing else, which for him was its own kind of answer. I looked over at Jenna, sitting near the back with her laptop closed in front of her for once. She wasn't looking at Dale anymore. She was looking at me, and something in her face had shifted since the meeting started, the kind of look people get when they realize they picked a side a little too early and are only now doing the math on it. I didn't say anything to her. Not yet. There would be time for that conversation later, on different terms than this one. Dale gathered his folder and left the room without looking at anyone, and I sat there at the head of the table I used to sit 3 chairs away from, thinking about how strange it was that none of this felt like winning, not exactly. It felt like something quieter than that. Something closer to finally being believed. A few weeks later, a new hire named Priya stopped by my office, the same open floor building, different floor entirely now, holding a report she was clearly nervous about handing in. I don't know if this is good enough yet, she said, hovering in the doorway. I remembered standing in that same kind of doorway once, waiting for someone to tell me my work wasn't good enough before I had even finished explaining it. Let's go through it together, I said, pulling a chair up next to mine instead of across the desk. Sit down. Tell me what you were trying to do with the numbers first, before we talk about what needs fixing. She sat, and for the next 20 minutes I did the thing nobody had done for me in that building for a long time. I listened before I judged. Dale's name came up in a company memo not long after, a quiet transition, effective immediately, no announcement, no all-hands meeting this time. Nobody made him stand in front of a room and explain himself. I made sure of that. Some kinds of quiet costs more than any public reckoning ever could. I thought about that folder from 3 months ago, the one with the notary stamp, sitting in a drawer in my new office now, not as a weapon anymore, just as proof. In 4 months, I was going to own the building he was firing me in. Turned out I didn't need 4 months. I just needed him to finally see the papers.